President Trump is taking a stand against Vladimir Putin in a way that we've rarely, if ever, heard from him before.
We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. We want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kiev and kill 60 people. It's got to stop. I speak to him a lot about getting this thing done. And I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev or some other city. And I said, it's strange. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything.
Hey everyone, Dr. John here. So welcome to the podcast. So what just happened, guys? Trump is publicly confusing enemy nations with American partners, babbling about mob terminology in front of astronauts and reporters, and letting a nuclear-armed adversary dictate foreign policy terms through a phone call the White House didn't even announce.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air, taking you straight to the Oval Office. President Trump meeting with the German chancellor, the first world leader to meet face-to-face with Trump since the attacks on Iran, a war that's showing no signs of ending anytime soon, and travel out of the region becoming much more difficult. Let's listen in.
Very strong. We've been able to do our deals, and it's been very strong. We'll obviously be talking a little bit about Iran today, and he's been helping us out. We've been very nice, actually. And that is coming along, as you see, very well. They have no Navy. It's been knocked out. They have no Air Force. It's been knocked out. They have no air detection. That's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And
all while allies openly question whether America is still a reliable partner. The unraveling is happening in plain sight. The phone call is where this entire descent into chaos begins. And the details of that conversation fundamentally rewrite the power dynamic between Washington and Moscow. We learned about this call not through the official channels of the White House Communications Office.
Just about everything's been knocked out. So we'll see how we do, but we're doing very well. We have a great military, and they're doing a fantastic job. So we'll be talking about that. And we're talking about some very big trade deals, and those I know will work out too. So I just want to say it's a great honor to have you at the Oval Office, the beautiful Oval Office, beautiful White House. It's a special place, even from your standpoint, and you have some very special places too. And I look forward to being with you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for having me here in this Oval Office for the 3rd time now.
Yeah.
Really happy to have the opportunity to speak with you in these challenging times. We are on the same page in terms of getting this terrible regime in Tehran away, and we will talk about the day after, what will happen then if they are out.
Not through a briefing by the press secretary and not through a formal readout distributed to the American press corps. The news came from Russian state media. A readout was provided directly to TASS, the propaganda arm of the Kremlin, detailing the content of a 90-minute conversation between Vladimir Putin and the President of the United States. Let that sink in for a moment, because the humiliation embedded in that procedural fact.
We have to talk about our trade agreement, which I would like to be in place as soon as possible. And we have to talk about Ukraine. There are too many bad guys in this world, actually, and this is an issue we have to talk about because we all want to see this war coming to an end as soon as possible. But Ukraine has to preserve its territory and their security interests, and, well, we will talk about that.
Right. We will.
Looking forward to that.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you
That's some
for your hospitality. Thank you for letting me spending the night in your guest house.
That's
it's
right.
A very, very
good,
comfortable place.
Hope you liked it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, great place. And a famous place.
That's good. Very famous.
So many former presidents.
That's
there.
right.
Yeah.
Very famous place. Any questions, please?
Mr. President, did Israel force your hand to launch these strikes against Iran? Did Netanyahu pull the United States into this war?
No, I might have forced their hand. You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics.
is staggering. The American people had to learn what their own president discussed with a hostile foreign power by reading the Russian government's version of events. The White House was either too disorganized, too ashamed, or too subservient to present its own narrative first. The message this sends to the world is unmistakable. Putin controls the information flow, and Trump is merely a recipient of directives. The substance of the call was even more devastating than the optics of its disclosure. Vladimir Putin delivered a warning to Donald Trump.
After years of heaping praise on the Russian leader, of touting their personal relationship, of taking Putin's word over his own government's at times, the scene that played out today inside the Oval Office encapsulated a remarkable shift for this president. To underscore his anger, he's giving Putin an ultimatum and threatening action that many people, from Capitol Hill all the way to Kyiv, have been calling for. The president announced a deal to allow NATO to buy American-made weapons to supply Ukraine on the battlefield, while also threatening economic punishment if Putin fails to reach a peace deal in the next 50 days. It would mark the first time, and this does mark the first time, that we've seen the president take direct action against Putin's aggression this term, marking an unmistakable departure from the years of comments like these.
I respect Putin. He's a strong leader, I can tell you that. If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. One of my best meetings ever was with Vladimir Putin. Putin meeting was one of the best meetings I've had. I get along with President Putin.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him. Putin is smart. He's a very smart guy. He's a very cunning person. When I got elected, we spoke, and I think we're going to have a deal.
With the cold, hard edge of a man who knows he has the upper hand. He told the American president in no uncertain terms that if the United States and Israel proceed with another round of military strikes against Iran, if they dare to launch a ground invasion or escalate the campaign of aerial bombardment, the consequences will be catastrophic and extremely dangerous. This was not a diplomatic suggestion or a polite request for restraint. This was a line drawn in the sand by a rival power that has positioned itself as Iran's strategic partner.
It remains to be seen tonight how President Putin will respond to President Trump's new threat and how the president himself will follow through on it. Questions that I asked his ambassador to NATO at the White House this afternoon. The president is sending defensive weapons to Ukraine. Is there any plan to send offensive weapons? Is that under consideration?
Well, so all weapons are both offense and defense. Obviously, air defense is important and critical for the situation, but at the same time, we're not taking anything off the table.
And when it comes to the tariffs that he's threatening to put in place against Russia, Russia imports very little to the United States. So how do you ensure that it has actual impact?
Well, it's because they're secondary sanctions. It's sanctions on countries that are buying the oil from Russia. And so it's not about sanctioning Russia. It's about tariffs on countries like India and China that are buying their oil. And it really is going to, I think, dramatically impact the Russian economy.
And how did the president decide on 50 days?
We need an end to this war. The slaughter that's happening is unbelievable. Russia has picked up 1% of Ukrainian territory in the last 18 months, and they've lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield. The time to end the slaughter is now. The time to end the killing is now. And so 50 days is the appropriate amount of time because it needs to happen now.
Putin was telling Trump that the era of unchecked American military adventurism is over, that Russia will not tolerate further aggression against its allies, and that the United States should think very carefully before taking another step. The man who promised to be the toughest negotiator in American history. The man who said he would stare down foreign leaders and make them blink.
And my lead source tonight is one of the primary supporters of a bill to sanction Russia, one with 85 co-sponsors, I should note, in the Senate. Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal is here with me now, and it's great to have you, Senator. Just first on this remarkable shift from President Trump. I mean, looking at that compared to what he was even just saying when he took office, it is quite something. Do you think that he's putting enough pressure on Putin tonight?
I think that it is a remarkable turn and a very positive step, not only economic sanctions, but also military aid that will be, in effect, sold to NATO and then provided to Ukraine. But these economic sanctions that he's talking about are good. Our bill is better. He's applying a hammer. We have a sledgehammer. And our bill is also broader because it applies to the Russia shadow fleet. I think that we'll know in 50 days whether Putin changes his tune. I am
just spent an hour and a half on the phone being told what he cannot do by Vladimir Putin. The timing of this warning makes Trump's subsequent behavior even more alarming because just before the call, the president had been telegraphing his intentions to escalate the conflict. He had been on the phone with a friendly reporter at Axios.
Not optimistic. I think we should push forward with our bill. 85 co-sponsors. It'll have 90 votes if it's given a vote. And I think we need that kind of sledgehammer.
So you don't think Putin's going to come to the table in the next 50 days? You don't see that happening?
Given his history, and I think the president's right, a lot of nice talk, but very, very little in the way of sensible kinds of proposals to Ukraine for any kind of ceasefire or peace talk. So I'm pessimistic that Putin will alter his strategy before force is actually applied. He's a thug. He understands force, economic force or military force, and our sanctions will be a force multiplier because the Europeans are looking to us. As I saw when we visited Rome recently for the Coalition of the Willing, every one of those presidents, prime ministers, thanked Senator Graham and myself for moving forward with the sanctions bill.
So do you think your sanctions bill, which to be clear would go up to it would essentially allow him to go up to basically 500%. He was saying today that there's not much difference made above 100%. Do you think it ultimately is going to get a vote?
I believe it will. And the reason I think it will is that the president was very receptive to the bill today.
A journalist who functions as little more than a conduit for the administration's messaging, and he laid out his plan for a short resumption of strikes. He described a scenario where CENTCOM would target Iranian infrastructure with the goal of bringing the regime back to the negotiating table through what he euphemistically called a brief opening of hostilities. This is the logic of a man who learned nothing from the first round of failure. When the initial strikes were launched, Trump genuinely believed the regime would collapse within days. He expressed genuine, visible surprise when the Iranians did not immediately crumble and his leverage did not materialize. Now, rather than learning from that catastrophic miscalculation, rather than absorbing the lesson that bombing campaigns do not always produce tidy outcomes, he is proposing to do the exact same thing again and expecting a different result. This is not strategy. This is compulsive repetition born of an inability to process failure. The naval blockade that Trump continues to boast about as a stroke of genius is a slow-motion disaster that is strangling global commerce and driving up energy prices. He has convinced himself that by sealing off the Strait of Hormuz, he can squeeze Iran until its leadership cries uncle, a phrase he apparently believes constitutes a sophisticated geopolitical strategy. The notion that a complex nation-state with deep reserves of national pride and powerful military allies will simply surrender because of economic pressure is a child's understanding of international relations. The Iranians have made it abundantly clear that if the United States attacks again, they will respond with overwhelming force against American and allied targets across the region. They have made specific promises about the scale and ferocity of their retaliation. Does the president even know about these warnings? Has anyone in his rapidly shrinking inner circle briefed him on what Iranian military commanders have been saying publicly for weeks? Or is he operating solely on the basis of his gut instincts, the same instincts that predicted a quick victory and produced a bloody stalemate? The Russian government is openly mocking the United States right now, and they are doing it in public, on social media, where the entire world can watch. Their top diplomatic envoy to Washington posted a statement that practically dripped with sarcasm, describing the Trump-Putin conversation as constructive, while noting that the two leaders also discussed potential economic and energy cooperation between their countries. Think about what that means. While American soldiers are deployed in a war zone, while the administration is threatening to bomb Iran again, while the markets are tanking and allies are panicking, the President of the United States is exploring energy deals and economic partnerships with the very country that is sheltering and arming the regime we are fighting. This is beyond treasonous incompetence. This is a president who sees foreign policy not as a means of advancing American interests, but as a personal business opportunity, a chance to make deals with strongmen while ignoring the strategic consequences. The Oval Office press conference that followed the Putin call was a spectacle of cognitive decay and verbal incoherence that should terrify every American who cares about the stability of their government. Trump had assembled a group of astronauts behind him, presumably to use their heroic image as a backdrop for his own self-aggrandizement, the way he has done with sports teams and military personnel throughout his political career. He treats decorated Americans as props, human scenery, to make himself look presidential, while he rambles through a stream of consciousness that reveals a mind unable to distinguish between fact and fantasy, between ally and adversary, between past and present. What unfolded in that room was a cascade of verbal errors, bizarre tangents, and outright fabrications that would have ended any other political career on the spot. The most glaring moment of confusion came when Trump began talking about the naval conflict, and in a stunning display of geographic and political disorientation, he confused Ukraine with Iran. He started talking about how Ukraine had been militarily defeated. He claimed that Ukraine had lost all of its ships, that 159 vessels were sitting at the bottom of the sea. He was describing Ukraine, a land war in Eastern Europe, when the subject of the discussion was supposed to be Iran, a naval conflict in the Persian Gulf. This is not a minor slip of the tongue. This is a fundamental failure to keep two of the most significant geopolitical crises of his presidency separate in his mind. Ukraine is the country that has been fighting a Russian invasion for years, the country that his own administration has been alternately supporting and undermining depending on the president's mood and his relationship with Putin. Iran is the country we are actively blockading and bombing. These are not obscure nations. They are the central theaters of American foreign policy, and the President of the United States cannot remember which one he is talking about. The fixation on the number of ships destroyed reveals a mind that grasps for concrete, boastable numbers without any understanding of context. He wants to talk about sunk ships because it sounds like victory. He wants to cite a specific figure because it sounds authoritative. But he is citing the wrong country's navy, conflating the Black Sea Fleet with the Persian Gulf, blending two separate conflicts into one incoherent narrative that leaves foreign leaders and military commanders wondering who is actually making decisions in the White House. The confusion between Iran and Ukraine is particularly damning because it suggests that the 90-minute call with Putin, which was presumably focused on Iran, got scrambled in Trump's brain with the broader context of Russian aggression and the ongoing war in Europe. He cannot separate the threads. They are all tangled together in a deteriorating neural network that produces gibberish instead of policy. Then Trump pivoted to attacking NATO, calling the alliance a paper tiger and complaining that the Europeans refused to help in the Strait of Hormuz. He claimed that King Charles had told him personally that the United Kingdom would have assisted in the naval operation but for the constraints of NATO membership. This is delusional on multiple levels. The British monarch does not make military deployment decisions. King Charles is a ceremonial head of state who stays scrupulously out of political and military affairs. The idea that he privately assured Trump of his willingness to send British forces into harm's way, but lamented that NATO prevented it, is a fabrication so transparent that it would be laughed out of any serious diplomatic gathering. But more importantly, the attack on NATO comes at a moment when American forces are engaged in a precarious military operation, and we desperately need the support, the legitimacy, and the logistical backing of our allies. Alienating NATO, calling them useless, and claiming they refuse to help in a crisis is precisely the kind of rhetoric that Putin wants to hear. It fractures the Western alliance and leaves the United States isolated. The spiral then took an even stranger turn when Trump began rambling about the FBI and a former director he has been obsessed with for years. He started talking about a social media post involving seashells on a beach and the number 86, and he launched into an explanation of mob movie terminology. He claimed that the number 86 is a reference used by gangsters to order a hit, to have someone killed, and that a criminal case was therefore justified against a former FBI director for using the term. This is the President of the United States standing in the Oval Office explaining to the American people that a criminal investigation was launched based on his interpretation of a slang term from mafia films. Never mind that 86 is also, and far more commonly, a restaurant industry term that means to remove an item from the menu or to refuse service to a customer. It has been used in diners and kitchens across America for decades without any implication of murderous intent. But Trump's mind, steeped in decades of tabloid paranoia and late-night television, immediately went to the most violent interpretation possible, and he used it to to justify the weaponization of the Justice Department against his political enemies. The astronauts standing behind him during this monologue must have been wondering what fever dream they had wandered into. These are men and women who have risked their lives to advance human knowledge and exploration. They represent the pinnacle of American achievement and scientific excellence. And they were being used as human scenery while the president rambled about killing mobsters, confusing war zones, and attacking Democratic allies. The disrespect to their service, the debasement of the office, the sheer embarrassment of having the leader of the free world behave this way in front of national heroes is something that will linger long after this administration is gone. Foreign diplomats watch these press conferences, and they report back to their capitals that the American president is unwell. They do not say this as an insult. They say it as a threat assessment. The cognitive confusion deepened when Trump began talking about his own physical condition. He looked at the astronauts, men and women who have undergone some of the most rigorous physical and psychological testing in human history, and he declared that he believes he could be an astronaut himself because of his great physical shape. This would be harmless comedy if it came from anyone else, a late-night joke, a moment of self-deprecation. But coming from Trump, it is sinister and revealing. He genuinely believes this. He has convinced himself that he is a physical specimen, that his health is excellent, that his cognitive abilities are sharper than anyone else's. The disconnect between his self-perception and the reality that the rest of us can see with our own eyes is the hallmark of profound psychological disturbance. This is not confidence, this is delusion. And when the most powerful man in the world is delusional about his own capabilities, he makes decisions based on a fantasy version of himself rather than the actual constraints of reality. The humiliation of those around him continued when a reporter asked a question, and Trump, unable to hear it, turned to the administrator standing nearby and made a comment about the man's physical appearance. He gestured toward the official's ears and asked, loudly, whether those big ears could hear the question. This is the behavior of a schoolyard bully, not a president. It is the kind of casual cruelty that Trump has practiced his entire life. The instinct to find a physical feature and mock it, to reduce a serious professional to a caricature, to establish dominance through insult. Every foreign leader watching this sees a man who cannot maintain the dignity of his office for even a few minutes. Every ally sees a president who treats his own appointees with contempt. Every adversary sees weakness. The ignorance of his own government's functioning was laid bare. When a reporter asked him about a Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act, it was clear from his reaction that he had no idea the ruling had even been issued. The highest court in the land had handed down a decision with major implications for American democracy, and the president was completely unaware. He had not been briefed. He had not read about it. He had not been told. The machinery of government is running without presidential input on the most fundamental questions of law and rights. He is checked out, distracted, consumed by his personal grievances and his obsession with his enemies, while the institutions of the republic operate on autopilot. This is the danger that critics have been warning about. This is what happens when a man who has no interest in governance occupies the office. The global reaction to this meltdown is exactly what you would expect. President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, a man who has spent years fighting for his nation's survival against the Russian invasion that Trump's buddy Putin launched, gave an interview in which he went directly after the administration. He targeted VP Vance, the vice president, and he did not mince words. Zelenskyy has been dealing with Trump's mixed signals and back-channel flirtations with Moscow for years. He has watched as American support for Ukraine has been used as a bargaining chip in domestic political games. He has seen Trump praise Putin and disparage NATO and confuse Ukraine with other countries. And now, with the administration openly discussing economic cooperation with Russia while the war continues, Zelenskyy is speaking out with a clarity born of desperation. He understands that American credibility is collapsing, that the security guarantees that Ukraine has relied upon are being eroded, and that the man in the Oval Office cannot be trusted to honor commitments. The polling data paints a picture of a presidency in freefall. Every major survey shows the same trajectory. Trump's approval rating has collapsed into the low 30s, a level that historically signals a failed presidency. The Reuters poll puts him at a level that would doom any incumbent. The Associated Press poll shows even lower numbers. When you drill down into the specific issues that voters care about, the standard of living, the economy, inflation, the numbers are even worse. His handling of the economy has sunk into the 20s in some surveys. He is polling worse than Biden did at his lowest points. He is polling worse than Jimmy Carter during the energy crisis. He is approaching the territory of Richard Nixon at the moment of his resignation, the man who promised to be the greatest jobs president in history, who said he would bring down prices on day one, who claimed that only he could fix the economy, has delivered a cost of living crisis that has soured the public on his leadership entirely. The market reaction to all of this chaos is exactly what any rational observer would expect. The uncertainty created by a president who threatens to bomb countries one day and then receives warnings from their patrons the next is toxic to investment. The naval blockade is strangling trade. The confusion between allies and adversaries is making it impossible for businesses to plan for the future. Capital is fleeing American markets. Foreign investors are pulling their money out and looking for safer harbors. The dollar is weakening. The bond market is signaling deep anxiety about the long-term stability of American governance. Every time Trump opens his mouth in a press conference and rambles about astronauts and mob movies and big ears, the confidence of the global financial system erodes a little further. The people who manage trillions of dollars in assets are watching this and concluding that the United States is being run by a man who is not mentally equipped to handle the responsibilities of the office. The strategy of crying uncle, which Trump has articulated as the entire basis of his Iran policy, deserves to be examined as the pinnacle of strategic vacuity that it is. He believes that by applying enough pressure, by making things painful enough, he can force the Iranian leadership to simply give up. He does not understand the history of Iran, the revolutionary ideology of its regime, the deep well of nationalist sentiment that has sustained it through decades of sanctions and isolation. He does not understand that nations do not surrender just because the American president wants them to. He thinks international relations operates like one of his real estate negotiations, where the other side can be bludgeoned into submission and then everyone shakes hands and signs a deal. The real world does not work that way. The Iranians have already absorbed the first round of strikes. They did not cry uncle. They dug in. They prepared for retaliation. They reached out to their allies. They made clear that a second round would be met with overwhelming force. The strategy is failing. It has already failed, and Trump's response to failure is simply to insist that it is working and then try the same thing again while hoping nobody notices the bodies piling up. The deeper sickness at the heart of all of this is the relationship between Trump and Putin. The 90-minute call, the economic cooperation discussions, the willingness to receive warnings from Moscow and apparently take them to heart, all of this points to a relationship that has never been adequately explained to the American people. Why does Trump treat Putin with the deference he shows to no other world leader? Why does he accept the Kremlin's characterization of events while attacking his own intelligence agencies? Why does he seek economic deals with a country that is actively undermining American interests around the world? These are questions that have been asked for years and have never received satisfactory answers. The pattern of behavior is consistent and damning. Trump respects Putin. He trusts Putin. He seeks Putin's approval. And when Putin tells him to back off, he at least partially complies. This is not the posture of a leader defending American sovereignty. This is the posture of a junior partner seeking the favor of a patron. The crash out in the Oval Office is not an isolated incident, a bad day, or a moment of fatigue. It is the direct result of a presidency that has been hollowed out of competence and filled with grievance, paranoia, and delusion. The staff who might have managed him, who might have kept him on script or prevented the most damaging outbursts, are gone. They have been fired, pushed out, or have resigned in exhaustion and disgust. What remains is a core of loyalists who enable his worst impulses and tell him he is doing great while the world burns around them. The press secretaries go out and spin the absurdities into something resembling coherence. But the video does not lie. The transcripts do not lie. The man standing in front of the astronauts, ranting about gangster terminology and confusing Iran with Ukraine, is the President of the United States, and there is no filter or spin that can make that okay. The implications for the midterm elections, for the future of American democracy, and for the stability of the international order are profound. A president this disconnected from reality cannot be trusted to make decisions about war and peace. He cannot be trusted to honor alliances. He cannot be trusted to manage the economy. He cannot be trusted to uphold the Constitution. The polling shows that the public is reaching this conclusion in growing numbers. The institutional Republican Party, which has has enabled this behavior for years is watching its electoral prospects collapse. The world is watching an American president implode in real time, and the only question remaining is how much damage he will do before the system finally removes him from power or the voters render their verdict. The Oval Office meltdown is a symptom of a presidency in terminal decline, and the end cannot come soon enough for the country or the world.